Thank you for checking out Mock Mentality Podcast. Just a heads up, this one gets pretty deep into airline pilot operations and contract talk. So there's a lot of industry jargon that might be tough to follow if you're not familiar with it. You can also reference Mock Mentality, Contract Chronicles, Volume 0 for more information about this topic.
The information and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guests. They do not reflect the official policy or position of any agency, airline, military branch, or institution. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended as legal, medical, or professional advice.
This podcast should surprise you, especially if you're not a Southwest Airlines pilot. Today, we're going to explore some of the tax advantage retirement provisions Southwest pilots have negotiated over the years that, in my opinion, should become the baseline across the airline industry. A few weeks ago, I was talking with a Southwest captain about his retirement. Like us pilots often do, we started comparing retirement accounts. And when I got into the numbers, the one thing really caught my attention. His retirement savings were double mine and larger than what I'd seen from my friends at other airlines like American and Delta. The conversation wasn't about bragging rights, it just made me curious. As I've gotten older, I've noticed something else. More and more, I'm flying with pilots who've reached mandatory retirement age at 65 and immediately start looking for another flying job. Some go on to instruct or move to Part 91, Part 135. Some simply need another paycheck. At the same time, I've met Southwest pilots who retire before 65 or at 65 and never fly professionally again because they don't have to. That got me wondering, is it simply higher pay? Is it better retirement planning? Is it better investing? Or is it something built in Southwest contract that quietly compounds over a 30-year career? Today, we're going to break down the retirement provisions, work rules, scheduling flexibility, and unique pay philosophy that have helped make Southwest one of the most financially rewarding careers in aviation. Welcome back to Mock Mentality. This is episode 4, the second installment of Contract Chronicles. In this series, we're looking beyond hourly pay to understand the details that shape a pilot's career, quality of life, and ultimately retirement. Because as we've learned, the devil really is in the details. So, this episode isn't about comparing hourly pay. We're just talking about work rules, scheduling, retirement, quality of life, the things that most pilots don't realize until they're years into their airline career. So before we get into this, why don't you tell me, you're a Southwest captain. How'd you get started? A brief 2 minutes. Tell me about you. How'd you get started in the flying business and how'd you end up at Southwest and where do you sit at Southwest?
Okay, honestly, I wanted to play baseball. My dad had played semi-pro ball, and so I wanted to, and it didn't work out in college. And fortunately, I went into the military and became a pilot and flew during the first Gulf War. And once the war was over, things were downsizing in the military, bases were closing, and I fortunately was looking to possibly go to an airline, and there was only 2 I really wanted to go to at the time because I was looking at balance sheets, and those were UPS and Southwest. I'd already had some exposure to the night cargo world, and so Southwest was the place I kind of wanted to be. It was a small airline at the time, and fortunately, I got hired there. So I've been there over 30 years. I have some great seniority. We have 12,000 active pilots right now. I think more than 17,000 pilots have been hired over the course of now 55 years of Southwest's existence. And so I've been flying the 737 for 30 years, flown the 200, 300, 500, 700, and the 800, and the 8 MAX. So I've only had to fly one airplane for 30 some years, which means I've never had to go to any form of training into a different airplane type.
I just finished training again. I don't know how many long courses I've done. So it does get a little painful. And first of all, thank you for your service. Did you do any union work for SWAPA or have you volunteered for the union or?
I've assisted the union. I've never done it in an official capacity. And I've also assisted the company, I guess, in one official capacity somewhere mid-career point.
Okay. I want to bring up something that is not in the script that just happened today to a pilot for a different airline. They attempted to pick up a trip that had premium pay, only that the premium pay was dropped during the phone call. So they called scheduling. We have some IT limitations. This is a company I work for, and we have some IT limitations. So he made a phone call for whatever reason. So he didn't pick up the trip because they removed the premium pay. And then a pilot behind him called and picked up the trip who believed he was getting premium pay. And the company refused to pay it. And he sent a PDR to the union. And the union said, yeah, the company can remove premium pay before it's signed. You being a Southwest pilot, how does that strike you? Is that something, I really don't know. This is just something that came up and I thought it'd be something good to discuss, because I think when it comes to premium pay, the airline that I work for is drastically different than not only Southwest, probably the rest of the industry. So what's your take on that? How would you respond to that if that happened to you? If you called to pick up a premium trip and the scheduling removed the premium trip, and what sort of support would you get from your union, if any?
Well, first of all, things have changed at Southwest Airlines over the years. We used to use the telephone system. Now we're pretty much predominantly a digital acknowledgement type system. We have what's called a SWOTA system, which is a text that comes out showing that the trip was offered at premium. And, so there's a digital footprint of what's taking place. In the old days, like we had telephone calls, but once something was offered, it would be a recorded line. So that would be disputed by the pilot potentially, and then with the backing of the union, or should we say the Southwest Pilots Association, and then an audit would take place, and the audit would typically catch it, and so there wouldn't be a whole lot of stress. And it's gotten much easier now because you just take a screenshot of a couple things and send it to what we call our contract admin, our pay people. These are employees hired by the Southwest Pilots Association, Airline Pilots Association. We call it SWAPA, and they do their work, and they literally put out information quite frequently. If it's not monthly, it's quarterly, on the amount of now tens of millions of dollars they have saved pilots over the last 2 contracts, I think it is, that we've had in audit catches or pays, and it's done pretty seamlessly. So I'm saddened to hear that you guys are still antiquated in using the telephone. I'm not saying we don't use the telephone, but it's very rare that we use the telephone anymore.
Yeah, that's funny. You said telephone system. It generally isn't, but anything out of base. I don't know what this particular individual was trying to do. My guess is it was out of base, but anything out of base requires a phone call. And then it's, it blows my mind that we have to use that as well. For an out of base, it's all computerized. You would think that you just click on the trip and hit select when you meet the contractual rules that are in place. But so you said, that's a gigantic number. The audits have saved $10 to $15 million over the last 2 contracts. Is that something? Did your union publish those numbers, or where did you get?
Yes, they do. Those numbers are published. I don't have the latest, greatest. I just know that more than 2 contracts ago, when we had a pilot who's now retired, who was president, he's the one that literally brought that system up, and it's been wonderful. I mean, it's they are earning their keep over at SWAPA, what we're paying those employees to do for our pilots, and they're proud of the work they do, because we're busy flying airplanes, trying to take care of a family, do this, that, and the other. And sometimes to track your own pay and wonder what's going on. There's one that just happened recently where a pilot's out on a double time trip. And at the end of the trip, there was some additional part, and he thought he'd try to get it premium. He didn't get it premium. It went to a reserve, and we have the ability to take it from a reserve. That's not done electronically anymore. You've got to make the phone call to do that. Well, you could do it electronically, but you'd have to call up the pilot, say, would you put the trip in Trip Trade Giveaway? Then he would take it. So this pilot called scheduling, and they went ahead and put it on there, but they changed the code from double time to straight. And so we now even have I think it's beta or AI kind of written. It's been around for a little while. Once the trip's over, you can put the date the trip started, and the computer will show what the company has said the trip's going to pay and what the union says for the audit, and you can see the difference. And so it's really easy for the pilot to say, hey, there's a discrepancy there. And then now we just signed something recently. I think it's a memorandum of understanding between SWAPA and the pilots, basically the company and the schedulers. They have 5 days to complete an audit of a trip. So by the end of 5 days after the trip's over, what your pay is going to be on it. And then you would dispute it if you needed to go beyond that. But that rarely happens.
So a reserve pilot that's assigned a trip, he or she can electronically advertise that trip be picked up by a line holder?
He can do that, and he also can own the trip, what we call owning. If he owns it, you can never take it from him. And that was put in place for more junior pilots. that are, say, commuting to a base for reserve. And they're like, hey, I really want to fly that trip because I don't want to spend, more nights in a hotel than I have to at my own dime. But if a pilot doesn't own it, say he lives in that domicile, he may not own it, then you can just call and it's first come, first serve, but you get it at straight value. You don't get it at double or premium or double time. Premium, as we've been talking here, is time and a half for us, as I'm sure it's the same for you.
It's actually not. We can have a different discussion about it, and that's going to be a huge sticking point as our contract openers are approaching. But we do have the capacity to, as a reserve pilot, to lock the trip, to keep it electronically. But I haven't been reserve in a while. I'm about to get really smart on it because I'm about to be reserve, but I don't think we can electronically give it away. A line holder can take it electronically, but that would be a nice feature to be able to advertise it. So
you can give it away or trade it, and then you can also do what we have. It's terminology. It's called jetway trip trade. And so basically, you could be there at the last minute. Say you were getting off a trip, and you're like, "Hey, I'm already in uniform. I'd like to make a little extra money. I'm going to take this from this reserve." And you literally, right at the jetway, you make a phone call to the scheduler. Both pilots, should I say, are online, and boom, the trade happens. And that can be done with a line holder on a regular trip or whatever trip and a reserve.
Yeah, I think that we gotten away from that a little bit. I think it could be done, but it'd have to be, because of the rigs and stuff like that, it'd have to be day for day. Let's start off. I want to talk about how you guys get paid differently than the rest of the industry.
Yes, sir.
And for the people, and I want you to expand on it a little bit. I'll give you an example, and if you can talk to it just for simplicity. But for the people that don't know, I always say, anytime you see a pilot, he's not getting paid. Unless you're on the airplane in flight and he or she gets up to use the restroom. But all the pre-flight aircraft inspections, during the boarding process, any sort of delays, any sort of, if the airplane's parked at the gate, basically pilots aren't getting paid. And a lot of people will go on Airline Pilot Central and look at hourly pay rates, but not really see that, how we're actually getting paid. We're not working 40 hours a month or 40 hours a week, like a traditional, 9 to 5 job. So can you walk us through? I know they call it, instead of us, we just get paid hourly. If you fly 5 hours, you get paid for 5 hours. So let's just take a super simple example. Let's say San Diego to Los Angeles is an hour block time. So if I fly that, I'm going to get paid an hour to go from San Diego to LAX. And if it takes 2 hours because we're holding for an hour for weather, then I'm going to get 2 hours pay. If I do it in 35 minutes, I'm going to get an hour pay, just for simplicity. There's other rigs and stuff that applies and depends on what you're doing for the day. But can you expand on that example from San Diego to LAX and just say it's an hour, just an hour flight? How does the Southwest trips for pay, how does that translate? Can you explain that to us?
Absolutely. First of all, Southwest doesn't fly San Diego to LA. It's too short of a pairing for us. We just don't have that route structure. If we did, I think it would be handled much like yours. I don't think a main line would do it. I think a regional would probably do it. So let's take something a little different. Let's say, Phoenix to LA, right? So that's about an hour and 25 minutes block to block. But what started years ago, let me give a little background on this. So Southwest Airlines has been around for 55 years. Many people think Herb Kelleher started this airline. He kind of did, but he was not the first CEO. The first CEO was Lamar Muse. And what Lamar did was what was called a trip system, and it exists still to today. And Herb expanded upon that. But effectively, you were paid by the mileage. A trip was basically the mileage from Dallas to San Antonio, and it's 243 miles. And then there was incremental decimals, right, of it. Tenths is what we did for years. Now I think we go to hundredths of that mileage. But if you flew the trip 243 miles, in whatever time you did it in, you got paid one trip for pay. So the old days, and even before my time, and as part of my time, we would want to fly fast. We would want to shave time off on the ground because, as you know, we are all regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration, basically 100 hours in 672 or whatever the number of hours is. But it used to be 100 hours in 30 days and no more than 1,000 hours in a year. You agree?
Yep.
And so the more I shave off, the more I have the potential to go pick up. And so I can go make more later, even straight or time and a half or double time. So, but then started to evolve. They said, hey, we need some protections. There was no overfly protections. There was no hourly protections Because let's face it, if you're going to go, we know going west to east, all of us, we always normally have a tailwind. And going east to west, we normally have a headwind. And in certain times of the year, those headwinds can be very strong, more than 100 knots. So now we would be spending more time up there eating away our block for covering fewer miles. So Southwest guys would typically fly lower in the early days to try to get out of the winds to shave off time. And it was a win-win-win, right? Because now the airline stayed on time, which was good for the customer. There was less time on the jet, which means there was less maintenance needed to be accomplished. And the pilot had the opportunity to make more money, effectively sometimes 10 to 15% more a month. That being said, our system evolved even more to where we now got the pay of, we get the greater of the two, whatever the flight time is, and there's some flight time equivalent, or the mileage. And then that started to evolve even more later too, where you kind of hit on the nail. Hey, we don't get paid when we show up for this, that, and the other. And now we have in this latest, greatest contract, we have what things called duty time. It looks at your, not only the mileage and the flight time for the day, but hey, how long was I on duty? We have a thing that's called 0.74. Yeah, you take the duty day. So there's these easy numbers. Let's say you did a 10-hour day times 0.74. That would be 7.4 trips in a 10-hour day. So let's say your minimum day is 6.5 for us in trips, but your duty day went to 10 hours. Guess what? You're going to get paid 7.4. So you're going to get almost a trip more just for that longer day of duty. And then it's evolved even more now in this latest contract to where there's things that are called leg change override. So if the duty day were to change, you get more. If you have a long duty day, it goes over, I think, 12 hours. Don't quote me on that number, but there's a whole extra trip given to you. And then we have now ground time override. So a Southwest pilot today, unlike at the beginning or even what you have today, is being paid for everything. We're being paid for the pre-flight planning, and we don't have the longer show-ups that maybe an international pilot would have on the heavy equipment. Our traditional show-up is in domicile 1 hour prior to push and 30 minutes prior to push on the overnight. Unless it's international, it bumps up to about 45 minutes. So we still don't have very long pre-flights, right? Because everything's, as you know, is pretty much accomplished by the dispatcher. And you're going to do your weather look and check some NOTAMs and do some other things. But, we're now into a digital world of audio books, and all that stuff's on an iPad. When you and I started, it was all in a brain bag with books and making some telephone calls and getting printouts from the operations agent of your flight plan release and everything else. But again, back into all your stuff, the briefing, the debriefing, all those things are now wrapped up into all these things that we have in the way of overrides and protections for duty day and what have you. So the minimum pay for a pilot doing his line is 6.5 trips a day, and the average pilot works about 15 days a month. So you're talking about 100, 105 trips. I think the average pilot at Southwest flies about 113 trips a month. That's what it was the latest when I looked. And so to answer your question about flight time, when we make a comparison, we take all this data from years, of data from the scheduling system and from our people at SWAPA, that many of them are pilots that work on the scheduling committee. And we have determined that one trip of pay equates to effectively 52 to 53 minutes of flight time. So without getting into too many numbers, you would just take whatever our trip pay is, you'd multiply it by 60 and divide it by 53, and that converts to an hourly for many of the other airlines. It's not exact, but it's close.
Got it. So the rule of thumb culturally where I work is everyone basically says you can budget yourself to 85 hours a month. What do you guys culturally have a number? Is it 100? You said 113 trips for
right.
pay average on monthly. Is that kind of where Southwest culturally would budget their monthly budget would be based off 113 hours?
Well, this kind of goes into a whole different section. Do you all have PBS? I think that's what you have, right?
Yeah,
or not?
Yeah, we do.
See, we don't have that. We have lines that come out. So a 31-day month, 30-day month, a 29, a 28-day month. There are contract guarantees, and they used to be 89, 88, or 89, 87, and 85. Now it changed a little bit, but basically it's about 88 trips a month is what is the minimum guaranteed. But what we're seeing in the line construction, because Southwest has always wanted to be productive, if a guy was flying 113 trips on average a month, 113 divided by 60 times 53 would be about 99 hours of pay that they were getting. So see, it's not even the same anymore with this new stuff with these overrides that we get. The average, I wish I had some data here in front of me from the last line. I could probably get that if you wanted me to, but I would say we see lines today, maybe 105 trips in a 31-day month, down to 100 on a 30-day month. And then the 28-day months get a little less and can get down even lower if there's not much flying in the system to where they have to pay the minimum guarantee that month. And then if there's anything lower, they have what's called line guarantee, LG, they call it line guarantee in the bidding packet. So let's say a line only paid 84, but the min guarantee is 87. Well, they'd have to give you 3 trips of pay just for doing it. And guys look for that stuff, right? Because it's free money.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the average guy doing at Southwest? Again, 113 trips. We don't really butt up against the block until you get the high time flyers that are really trying to work the system. And they might run up, or not even high time flyers, because we have the line schedule, not PBS. Again, I'm breaching into a different section. Even a 2, 3, 4, 5 week guy of vacation, and he takes 1 week and turns it into 3 weeks off. He's like, hey, I want all this time off, so I'm going to fly hard the month before, so I don't have to worry. Everything works out kind of nicely on an average. And so then he or she may butt up against what we call the 98.5-hour limit. That's as far as scheduling will let you go, because they want some buffer in case you overfly.
Got it. Then those are actual flight hours, correct?
Correct. That's actual flight hours. Now, the pay may be a lot different. As an example, there's some guys out there without vacation, without making a sick call, that can easily get over 200 trips a month for less than 100 hours of block. So they're doubling their block. And why that happens, as we all know, because we're in the industry, deadhead pay. You're looking for deadhead pay. You're looking for overrides. You're looking for all those things that would give you what we in the industry would call free money.
Yeah, we call it soft time, and that's obviously a big thing. I've never seen anywhere near 200 hours a month. So are you saying that a Southwest pilot can get 200 hours a month without vacation and without a sick call in the same month?
It's difficult to do. That's about as far as you can go. I think the record still stands. We had a gentleman years ago, and there was 2 of them that went back and forth over some months. What they would do is they would bid their vacation in the summer on a 31-day month, and they would split. So they'd have a week on, a week off, week on, week off of vacation. So they got paid for all that vacation. They gave back all their trips to the company. So they had already started the month with over 100 trips. We had 2 individuals. One, I think, did 407 1 month, and the next guy did 409. And then the other guy came back and beat him the month, a year later with 412. I think that's the most trip count anyone has ever done. But in the summer, we can have a handful or more of guys that will blow through 300 hours, and a lot who will blow through 200 with their vacation.
Yeah. And a lot of the younger guys and girls don't understand. I've been a no voter for PBS since its inception and we're not going to get into this, but it doesn't honor seniority. There's a thing called the splat line. The union used to publish it. I think they pulled it. I haven't researched it, but they used to publish what the splat line was. And the biggest problem with our PBS is the G line. And I'm very much against the G line, but
what is the G line? Educate me on that. I'm not.
Yeah, the G line it's a guarantee line. So they say, I'm just making this up. The pilot that's approximately 87% in base, they're the G line. So what happens with PBS is you're not bidding for a line, you're bidding for trips, you're bidding for pairings, right? So the top guys all get their pairings, but then as it starts to, and depending how deep everyone bids, as it starts to get closer and closer to that G line, those trips might not be available, but they have to give a line to the person that's the G line and senior. So all of a sudden, all the senior guys and girls bid the top trips, the most lucrative trips. And then as it gets down closer to the G line that they called the splat line, which was basically the bottom 10 to 12% above the guaranteed line holder, they just threw together a schedule regardless of what you asked for, to include days off, to include not flying red eyes, to include not flying to Central America, stuff like that. So that being said, pre-constructed lines, you guys have what we used to call pre-constructed lines. Can you explain briefly? We're going to talk about this later, so we're already talking about it. But can you explain to these guys that are getting 407, 409, 412 trips per pay a month, how they do that.
Well, again, that's extremely rare, breaking 400. It's become less rare to break 300 in the summer, and it's becoming more common with, a small percentage. And I'm probably going to guess 5% or less of the pilots do this, right? But we also have a system that I wanted to bring up to you so that you realize that it's not just all the senior guys doing this, because what ends up happening at Southwest early on in the history of Southwest Airlines, you had a problem. You had the senior guys making 200 trips and the junior guys were barely getting paid the min guarantee. So they implemented a system called the CAP system. And what they do is they take 118% of the line average for that month in that domicile, and they publish a cap. So let's just say it was 100 trips was the line average. Well, 118% would be 118 trips would be the cap. So when guys either give away or they go to pick up extra, once you go over the cap, you go to the back of the line, and your seniority is you're an over the cap guy. And so now the junior guys get a bite of the apple. Right? Because so what happens early in the month is all the senior guys are getting their trips based on seniority picking up from open time. And let's just say you go over, you're 120 now. Guess what? You go to the back of the line and a trip comes out. You can still bid on it. But guess what? If you're over the cap and there's an under the cap guy, boom, he gets it until he goes over the cap. So then seniority kicks in again.
That's just a continuous cycle. Once you're over the cap that you just end.
Yep, every month. So the technique is, again, it's a technique. There's no procedure or policy, but it's just what happens among the pilots is, I like to say in baseball terms, we like to say you get right up underneath the cap, then you swing for you swing for the grand slam, and the grand slam is the 4-day trip that's going to pay. Normally you're getting time and a half, so a 4-day trip you're looking for at least 10 trips a day because 6.5 start straightening. So you're saying, hey, let's say the cap was 118 and I'm sitting at 117.2. I swing for the fence. I get a 4-day trip, and now I got 40 on. I got 10 a day, 40 on top of my 117. I'm sitting at 157. Now I go to the back of the line, and the only time I might get something is if nobody else under the cap is bidding it.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay, so it was an equalizer for the junior guys. So think about it. A junior guy could, in a case of a 100 trip line average, could make 118 trips. Well, 118 trips for pay, he may have to do, if he had a 100 trip line, that's 18, and he just picks up an extra 2 days. So the average line for the average guy is 15 days of work a month, let's say, sometimes less in a 31-day month. So he's doing maybe 16 or 17 days a month of work for 118 trips.
Wow.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good pay, I think, for that time off.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of my, I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but that's one of my complaints is that I don't want to fly a Southwest schedule every single month, but I wish I had the option to, and we don't have those. We don't have the options to. We can't, it's very, very difficult to come anywhere near your average. It has to be a perfect storm with legalities, especially on the bigger airplanes, because you get into a lot of legality issues real quick, and there's not a lot of frequency. You're not really flying a lot. You only walk through the airport once a day, and like 6 to 8 times a month total. But it's super efficient, and you run up to a lot of FAR legalities. So let's go back to that PBS and talk me through. The lack of PBS pre-constructed lines. You got a senior guy, a girl that's got 2 weeks of vacation, and they're bidding for. You guys just bid for August. Let's just say July. How does the pre-constructed lines work? How does that work with bidding vacation and getting time off?
It recently changed, but for years, I remember, I think it was 1997 or 8, when in the old days, when the pre-constricted lines happened, and all the vacations start on a Sunday and end on a Saturday, okay? And if you had overlapping on either side, guess what? They would break it up and you would have to fly it. So you had 7 days off. This was up to about 1997, I think. Don't quote me on that date, but it sticks in my mind. I do remember it extensively because it happened to me. And the company kindly said, hey, listen, we're going to give you the opportunity to either keep what we give back to you or you can give it back to the company. In other words, boom. So October, I did this. I happened to be flying with a guy who was going to become the new union president for SWAPA. And I said, hey, I'm not going to be here with you but 1 month because I had 1 week of vacation and it overlapped on both ends. And literally, I gave it back. Now, my trip count was well below the guarantee, but that's what I took on. I had 23 days straight off and I could go pick up where I wanted. Again, I was below the cap, so I had good power if I had any seniority. And I could decide on the front side or the back side where I wanted to pick it up. So the average guy can easily get for a week of vacation more than 10 days to sometimes 2 weeks off. He'll sacrifice some pay, but he has the time. And then he can decide. And again, I use this generic term. He or she can decide if they want to pick up on the front side, the back side. They can now pick up during the vacation, what we call the green bar, or when the actual date of the vacation is. But they have to pick it up premium, and they go behind everybody else. So what it did is it benefited the company and somewhat the pilot, because let's say it's summertime and you had that vacation and they're hurting for pilots. Hey, we'll take you if you want to work. But for years, Southwest said, no, we don't want you to work on your vacation. That changed. Now, this recent contract, we had one more change. You can slide your vacation. Remember, they were all Sundays to Saturdays. You could slide it 3 days left, up to 3 days left, and up to 3 days right. But you have to do it effectively 2 months before that month of vacation or that week of vacation is going to happen. So let's say I had a week of vacation in August. By the end of June, I would have to tell the company I want to slide it so many days left or right, and they'll approve it. And then they're going to construct the lines. And so all these lines are going to come out, and you're going to look to try to get the best pay you can get or max time off. We actually had a pilot or two that have written software to try to maximize that for us. One's called Swaptimizer, and the other one is called WBid Maximizer. And it'll tell you, hey, you're going to get paid. I think for 1 week of vacation, some pilots are fortunate enough to get 50 or 60 hours of pay for 1 week of vacation, whereas we're guaranteed only 26 and a quarter.
So that's what a lot of the younger pilots won't understand is how that works. Because when you have PBS, when you bid for your schedule, your vacation is blocked. You can't bid for a line without, and it's always going to take into consideration your vacation. So when you bid for a pre-constructed line, let's just make this up. If you have vacation, the 7th through the 13th, I think that's 7 days.
Yes.
And you bid for a line and there's a trip that's 5th, 6th, 7th, and that's 13th, 14th, 15th, and you get that line, it's going to drop those 2 trips that touch 1 day of your vacation on either side, correct?
Correct. And some of it may be paid and some of it may not be paid. They look for the break where they can pay it. And there's all these rules. I don't have them memorized, but because we don't need to anymore. We have software that does it for us, right? In the old days, what you would do is you say, let's say you were a Baltimore-based pilot. You'd be looking for a trip that was overnighting, say, in Seattle, way far away from Baltimore, because they'd have to pay to get you back. And then you say, okay, great, get me back. And now I'm going to drop it. And you paid me. And it wasn't even inside the week of the vacation. So you get what's called VO pay, vacation overlap pay. That's where these guys could take they may have some pay inside, or they may have only 26.25. I think it's 3.25 a day, if that math works out. And then inside the week of vacation. And then bang, what's hanging over is while they get that. And so that's how they create some time off with that 1 week of vacation. You can have a whole week off because what's the average lines do, right? They're 3 on 4 off, 3 on 4 off, right?
Right.
So you're eliminating 2 of the trips in the month, and what's maybe because you're having it touch both ends. And so now you've got what's the minimum you could see there? You could see 17, 18 days off minimum, probably.
Right. And people still use Swaptimizer to figure out what's the most lucrative vacation.
Yes, that's how they help do their bids. Or WBid Maximizer, that's another one they're using. The company we used to have all of our software for bidding, for line bidding, was done by pilots. Okay, and you had to subscribe for it and pay for it. Now the company finally struck a deal where they wanted to own that. A lot of our software historically at Southwest was done by pilots, became side jobs for them, and they made a lot of money. We have some really talented pilots at Southwest Airlines who develop software. And then all of a sudden, the company, right before the meltdown that we had in December a few years ago now, had shut off all of that except for the line bidding software. And then just this year, a few months ago, they bought or somehow struck a deal with one of the guys that had one of the software. And now the company's going to provide that software to everyone. Yeah. So, I think sometimes it's better because this is no offense to anyone that's in that industry, but nobody writes the software better than someone that uses it. An end user who writes software writes some of the best software you're going to find because he or she understands the needs of the client.
Right. Absolutely. Let's digress for 1 second. What was I'm getting to a point here because I kind of chuckled at this. Do you know ballpark what the losses were for Southwest during that meltdown of December?
Billions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, billions.
I jokingly said, I've had these conversations, these bar top conversations with pilots over the years, and they all tell me that I'm lying or that my friends are lying, and from pilots from Brand X Airline, and I jokingly said, I bet their profit sharing is better than ours. And it was after that meltdown. And that's just one of the things that I've said, man, we're really missing the boat here. You guys need to be digging a little bit deeper into your knowledge. And that's the purpose of this podcast. Hopefully it opens some eyes because I think we're failing in a lot of ways.
I've lived it, right? So Southwest Airlines typically had some really wonderful profit sharing years, much like what Delta's having now, right? And or has had here recently in the last few years. But things changed, and they changed 2 contracts ago when we transitioned. This is taking us into a different section in retirement. For years, Southwest had, the very first retirement plan we had was profit sharing. I think it started in 1973 or 74. Then by 1986, they got a 401k, but the 401k became run by SWAPA. Herb actually told the pilots of Southwest that, hey, I don't want to manage this. You guys manage it. So that was a blessing for us because SWAPA has done some great work. We had, I think, in the rating system of retirement plans across all retirement plans, this is years ago now, we were number 1 in the nation. I think today we've got somewhere either 9 to 13 billion under management in our 401k. And so Schwab holds that for us, and we have some great opportunities there. So for years, we had a match system. Okay, since 1986 all the way to, I think, the 2014 contracts. What is that? That's almost 30 some years. We had a match system. Initially, it was like 6%, and then it was 9.3% match. So you had to put money into your 401k to get money from the company. And in today's world, there's a lot of business companies out there that might do 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% or dollar for dollar up to 3%. Well, we were still doing better than everybody else, but everything was you had to put the money in. Then in the 2014 contract, whenever that came about, we transitioned because we were following the lead of United American Delta. We said we need an NEC, a non-elective contribution, and we got it. Okay, so we jumped. Not initially, I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think we may have gone to like to 13 and then to 14, or 14 then to 15%. So there was no longer a requirement to get a match. So now pilots were like, some, not all, because everybody, habit patterns are hard to break. You and I, for years, maybe we're putting 15% just to make sure. And the minimum guys years ago were putting at least 10 in so they get the 9.3% match. So they just keep doing that. But the newer guys would be like, why do I have to put anything in? Their company's going to give it to me. Well, that's a big mistake if you want to talk finance, because you can never go back and say, hey, can I put money back in my 401k from that years ago? No, get it in there as soon as you can and as much as you can, because it will pay huge dividends later. And that's for a discussion here later. But now we're all the way up to 18% NEC in this latest contract. And we also have 2% going into our market-based cash balance plan, plus any spillover. So we're getting from the company, without doing anything, 20% on top of our pay is going into retirement planning. Remember I said we were at 9.3%? That is another 10%. Our NEC is absorbing a lot of our profit sharing. We've had some really low years of profit sharing for Southwest in general. So the pilots have been, unfortunately or fortunately, right? Unfortunate to the other employees and fortunate to the pilots. We've basically taken our profit sharing and said, give it to us now. We don't want to work for it.
So we're actually there. So you can keep expanding on your retirement.
All right. So let's talk retirement. Yeah. So again, I opened this with the first plan we had was the profit sharing. And that made millions for guys, particularly the early pilots of Southwest, right? We had one pilot I had heard, I never confirmed it. I know who he is. I didn't speak to him directly about it, but he had left. He had 8 million. This is years ago, more than 20 years ago, left with 8 million in his profit sharing. He had put it all in Southwest stock.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of Yeah, I'm not a fan of that because, like, I'm a big fan of the S&P 500, right? And if you're a boglehead, if you follow John Bogle, what he did, with Vanguard, he believed that, hey, you don't need to go looking for the needle. You can just buy the haystack, and the haystack's the S&P 500. So the point of this is profit sharing did well for a lot of guys. I think it was 2 contracts ago or just this last contract, we developed the ability to roll our profit sharing into our 401k. Before, you couldn't do it till you reached 59 and a half. Okay. So now we had a one-time opportunity to roll over. So a lot of guys who were no longer getting money into the profit sharing because they were making too much money, so that excess would have to roll into some form of a plan. So again, I said 1974 roughly we had the profit sharing plan. 1986 we got the 401k managed through our swap of pilots. Then in 1999, about 13 years later, the pilots are saying, hey, look, we're forced to retire at age 60. We can't get Social Security to age 65. This was some of the discussion that was going on. I lived it, so I can speak about it. And I've also talked with some of the guys that actually were involved in getting it. They put a plan together to do what's called a top hat, a pilot deferred compensation plan. And they had this lady who was a CPA, I think. She was from Ernst & Young. Barbara Rausch was her name. And she put this plan together to give guys the opportunity to tax defer more money, but it would become a rabbi trust, which would mean it would be at risk if the company were to go bankrupt. They took it to Southwest Airlines, did a wonderful presentation. And this is a true story. 2 weeks went by. Barbara Rausch had not heard anything. She called the CEO of the company up. She called the company up, and I think it was actually Gary Kelly, the CFO, who she had presented to. And she says, hey, I just want to follow up on what's going on with this plan. And he says, well, we don't do things just for our pilots. Oh, she said, well, you misunderstood me. This is not for just the pilots. And at the time, the numbers were, this was for anyone making over $150,000 a year. I'm told that within hours later, a phone call was received by Barbara Rausch, and they had an agreement for a plan. Why now? Because now all the C-suite, all the senior VPs, maybe some of the VPs and senior directors of the company could get into these tax-deferred plan also. That's important to note because remember I said that this plan would be a rabbi trust and at risk if the company goes bankrupt?
Yeah.
If you were thinking on a risk scale of 1 to 10 and you heard, this plan is at risk if the company goes bankrupt, and you're in the airline industry, right? We've seen many airlines go bankrupt or go into Chapter 11 and come out, right? So the money could be at risk. You'd be thinking, wow, that's a 10 risk for me.
That's a black swan event away from being liquidated.
Correct. So now you hear that your CEO, your CFO, your COO, your senior VPs are all in that plan too. I would submit to you that you may say, my risk went from a 10 to a 7. Speculative, right? But that's the case. So this plan was very interesting as a rabbi trust. At the time, if you were under age 50, you can only put $12,500 a year in. If you were 50 to 55, you could put $25,000 a year in. And if you were older than 55, you could put $50,000 a year in. Tax deferred. Again, it's at risk. There's actually 6 ways to distribute the money, and you have to make a decision when you set up the plan. You can either take the money lump sum, 1-year payout, 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year payout. Many of the pilots at 55 were doing this when we still had age 60 because what they could see is, hey, it's only 5 years. If it looks like it's going to go south, I can get the money out by quitting also. There's 4 ways to get the money out: retire, die, be fired and get the money, and quit. So they felt comfortable that they could put away $250,000 and then live on that money from 60 to 65 and not have to touch their 401k or profit sharing. So that plan was very interesting there. So then the next step for risk is if a guy was below, say, he wasn't able to retire, but he has the ability to quit and take the money. Let's just say for an easy number, he has $250,000 or $500,000 in there. It looks like the company's going to go bankrupt. He's not old enough to retire. He hasn't died. He didn't get fired, but he has $500,000 in there. And he says, you know what? I'm 48 years of age. I'm going to take my money and run. I'm going to go ahead and quit and take it because he set it up as a lump sum. And the difference between a lump sum and a 1-year payout, and this is important to note, is that a lump sum would deliver to you the day you retire. A 1-year payout delivers January 5th, the year after you retire. We talk about our birthdays, right, as pilots, because we have a forced age to retire, right? It's 65 now, and you and I first started, it was 60. Let's say I have a December 15th birthday or even a November 15th birthday, right? Something like that. I may want to take the 1-year payout. Why? Because I've already made a full year of pay, and now you're going to give me that money and throw me into a higher tax bracket. Whereas, 15 or 30 days later, I could get that money. So that's something that would go into guys' minds as to whether to take the lump sum or the 1-year payout. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So you call that a top hat. You guys still have that top hat plan?
That plan is still in place. It started in 1999, and I'm not finished. I'm going to talk about 2 more plans we have on top of that, in addition to the market-based cash balance plan. So that plan exists, and in the last contract, they changed it. So we didn't have this the whole time. They changed it in our last contract, which is just a few years ago. And they said, look, we're not going to no longer do this age limit for the amount you can put in. We're going to say if you make $250,000 a year, you will be invited into the plan. And you could put up to a maximum of $50,000 a year, no matter how old you are. Okay. So, as we have even some first officers now that are making really good pay and captains too. So you have that. Plus, they came up with something which didn't actually happen in this contract. It happened before when we got the NEC. Someone argued and said, well, you're taking that money out of my paycheck. It's not NEC money. It's my money. So doesn't the NEC have to follow it? Well, as an example, if you have 18% NEC, right, and you put $50,000 that year into the top hat, you get another $9,000 of NEC that was tied to that $50,000. So you get $59,000 into the NEC or into the top hat. There's 2 other things about the top hat and these other 2 plans I'm going to tell you about. One thing, because they're a trust, you have some funds that you can put them into. They're managed by the company. So they have a lot of Vanguard stuff. They have the S&P 500 index fund, which is wonderful. They have some conservative funds and other things. But here's the problem. In finance, we talk about rebalancing portfolios, correct?
Right.
You cannot do that with these plans. So whatever you put it in, you're stuck with. You can never move it. Now, future contributions you can change. And each year, once a year, you get a chance to decide 2 questions. What fund am I going to put that next year's money into? And what percentage of my paycheck do I want to go to that fund? Here's another stipulation. You must fill up your 401k to stay in that, or you're going to get a financial penalty if you do that, because it's part of the trust, the way it's laid out. So if you don't fill up your 401k, your employee contributions, right? We have 2 sides to a 401k, the employer contributions and the employee, then you're going to get penalized. The IRS does not like that. So a guy could, in today's world, if you're not even under 50, I think it's 74,000 or so, 74.5 under the age of 50. And you could be in the top hat plan too, and you could get another 59,000. So we now have deferred as much as 130 close to $140,000 deferred. And I'm not done yet. So then we had in 2001, Colleen Barrett was president of the company, and the pilots were saying, hey, we have all this overage from the profit sharing. We can't put our profit sharing anywhere. We have to pay tax on it. We'd like to do what we did with the top hat, but using it with the NEC, right? So not the NEC, but the match money or the profit sharing money at the time, because we didn't have an NEC. So this is 2001. And they established what's called a 415 excess plan, which means there was spillover that we talk about today. So you could get in a spillover plan anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 of profit sharing money, tax deferred. And now that worked a little different. Instead of taking money out of my paycheck, it's profit sharing. So I have to decide, do I want 0% this year, 1, 2, 3, all in percent increments up to 100% to go into that additional tax deferred plan? Again, a rabbi trust at risk if the company goes bankrupt, but I could get somewhere from, I would say $10,000 to $15,000, effectively 1 to 2 IRAs deferred, but again, at risk, right? So now how do you want to distribute? You want it lump sum, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year payout. Today, that plan between the top hat and the 415 would be lesser money. So maybe you want to do your top hat lump sum or 1 year payout in case it looked like the company might go bankrupt, and maybe do a 2, 3, 4, 5 year payout with the 415 excess. So that was that plan. Shortly thereafter, 3 years later, pilots were making more than what is known as the it's the 401A17 limit in the tax code. And so you couldn't put money into the 415C plan. So we established a 401A17 excess. And that is for today's world, I think you have to make over 350,000. And any of the NEC at that point could be, anywhere from 0 to 100%. You could select to put into that plan. And again, you have the same funds. You could put it in an S&P 500 fund, a bond fund. You could put it in a money market if you wanted to. I think the wiser decision is to put it in an S&P 500 fund. Over time, you're gonna beat inflation and do extremely well. So then, at this last contract, we decided to. Guys were concerned. We had 3 plans that were non-qualified and 2 that were qualified. What I mean by that is non-qualified is at risk if the company goes bankrupt. We just talked about them: the Top Hat, the 415, the 401A17 excess plans, and we had the profit sharing and the 401k that were qualified. So we had heard from other airlines. I think Delta was the first to start with the market-based cash balance plan. They were not taking a percentage of pay. They were only using it for spillage. And it's my understanding they're approved now by the IRS. They're the only one. And we're still waiting for approval. But we got that plan. But in the contract, we asked for 1% of pay on top of it. We got that. And then we've gone through a couple of years and it increased to 2%. So we not only will be able here shortly to get spillover from the 401k and the profit sharing, or not the profit sharing, just spillover from the 401k between those 402G limits is what I think the number is. But anyways, we'll get that money in the market-based cash balance plan. The difference is it becomes qualified money, but it goes into a fixed fund that the company has no choice. It effectively will get somewhere between 3 to 5% return. So for a young guy who gets hired at Southwest Airlines at 25 or 30 years of age and has 30 to 35 years to do this, maybe even 40, it's like sticking money under the mattress at 3 to 5% return.
Wow.
Because he's competing with inflation. And he's forced to do that because it's all for one or one for all, right? So we all have to go into the market-based cash balance plan. We don't have a choice to say, I want to stay in the 415C where I can get market rates and accept the risk. We all have to go to the market-based cash balance plan. However, there was a loophole that I'm told through some of the negotiators on our thing that they left the 415C open for profit sharing spillover. So we'll keep that plan. So now we have 6 plans I just talked about. We also have the employee stock purchase, which is a product like yours, a 10%. So that makes a 7th plan. And for those that are not military retirees, we have the HSA, which makes that 8 plans for retirement that a Southwest pilot could effectively be involved in.
So of the Top Hat, the 415 access, the 401A17 access, are there tax incentives with those plans?
Absolutely. They're all tax deferred. And it's not access, it's excess.
Excess, yeah.
Excess is the word. I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah.
So those 3 plans are all tax deferred. So a pilot today, particularly a single pilot who's young, making the kind of money we are making today, right? They are easily in a 35 to 37% tax bracket.
Easily.
So we have a little rule that floats around, and this is not giving any financial advice. It's just something to think about because this is the to Roth or not to Roth, right? This becomes the issue. And I'm not opposed to Roth. I think Roth has a place and it's really important. But if you were to look at the 2026 tax code and you were to assume that you were an individual getting whatever the deduction is, or a 2-person, family filing jointly getting a deduction, I like to say this: if you're single making over 200, you might want to look hard at any traditional type of ways of reducing your income today and not paying tax on it. So the Top Hat, the 415, the 401A17 are good choices for pilots. We have some pilots that are deferring hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from taxation just because of these plans. And if you're married making more than 400, you might want to consider the same.
So what's the company's percentage that they're contributing to these plans? You got 18% for the 401k. Did you say 2% for the market-based cash plan?
Yes, 2% and spillover can go into market-based. So you have 18% NEC that can go to the 401k, 2% to the market-based cash balance plan. Once you fill up the 401k, which is 46.5, I think it is, and then you have the catch-ups. Let's talk about catch-ups, right? We have over 50 catch-up and now the over 60 catch-up for Secure Act 2.0. And now we're all required under those to Roth. So there's no choice. You just have to say, do you want to opt into those catch-ups or opt out? I think it's wise to opt in, because even though you're forced to Roth it, you know what? It's another retirement plan,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Take advantage of it. And you'll thank me later when you turn 55 or 60 or even 48, because some of these guys could go pretty early if they're smart about their investments. So once you fill up the 401k with the NEC, it has to go somewhere. It either can come back to you in the way of cash. When I say cash, in your pay stuff, but then it's going to be taxed at your rates, whatever you are. If you're a single guy making, in a 37% effective tax bracket, wow, that hurts, right? Whereas I could defer it and take the tax break and lower my income on the other and have more money to spend somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, once that limit is reached in the 415, and the number today is once you've made over 350,000, you have NEC that could go all the way up to, it's infinite. It's so you'd have 18% on, let's just say, and I know you didn't want to talk numbers, but some of these high time flyers, you may want to cut this. I'm just going to cut this. We've had a few pilots make over $1 million flying a 737.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we could couch this, but the starting limit of the 401A-17 is 350,000. So let's say a guy made 950,000. That's 600,000 times 18%. You do the math. That's over $100,000 he hid from taxes.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible.
And we are the only ones that have this. This was the genius of a few pilots. One who was a certified financial planner, a lady named Barbara Rausch, and a CEO and a CFO who are willing to say, this is wise.
So let's segue that into the retirement numbers. You've been in the left seat for a long time. I've bounced around between left seat and right seat for basically since 2019. And I kind of started this podcast off recording saying that I'm flying with lots of guys and girls that are approaching mandatory retirement age, which is 65, and they're looking for their follow-on job. That's
right.
I would say that it's a 60%, maybe even higher, of guys and girls all looking for another job to drag that suitcase around all over the globe. They all want an age extension to retire later than 65. My philosophy is different. I don't want to fly one day past the mandatory retirement age for multiple reasons. But culturally, what are you seeing at Southwest, taking that into consideration? Are guys and girls wanting to stay beyond 65? Are they looking for a flying job after Southwest when they're forced to retire?
It all depends. And I don't want to say that being like a politician, but let's just talk some numbers and see if this helps. And I may talk some philosophy too here. You said you had some philosophy. I spend a lot of time talking to pilots about different things along this line. First things first, we at Southwest Airlines, some of the data that we've pulled is that we've had about 17,000 pilots hired since 1971, total ever hired. We have today over 12,000 pilots on our active seniority list, master seniority list at the airline. Okay. As of today, or this near here, we've had about 450 pilots have retired early, meaning before their mandatory retirement age, which was 60 up to the year 2007. And since then, it's been 65. Of those 450 pilots, let me take one step back. There's about 35 or 3,800 pilots that have retired from Southwest. They're no longer, if you have 12,000 active and you have 17,000, that's 5,000. But here's what you're missing. We have deceased pilots, right? So of the living pilots who are retired, I think there's somewhere around 3,800, okay? 450 of those pilots have retired early. The average years of service they gave of those 450 pilots was 21 and a half years. Their average age of early retirement was 60.5, meaning they retired about 4.5 years early from mandatory retirement age.
Yeah, 400.
Additionally, on top of that, something that I didn't talk about was we have to address, just so people are aware why the numbers don't add up. We had COVID happen. And early on in COVID, every airline went through this. They started offering these incentive plans to leave early. We called it VSP, Voluntary Separation Program. It was a 5-year program that would begin effectively, your end of your career would be 8/31/2020. As of 9/1/2020, you would be retired, so to speak. You'd be on what was called VSP. For that, you got some things. You could get up to 5 years of pay, depending on what you had left. In other words, if you were 63 at the time, you would only get 2 years because you could only go up to the mandatory retirement age.
Okay, I see.
And of those pilots, 634 of our pilots took that. Of that group, the average years of service they had was 20.3. It was actually less than our early retirement pilots. And the average age, get this, of those 634 pilots was just over 60 years of age. Why? Because many of them got the full 5 years.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. They're 100% efficiency.
Right.
It's like
now
it's like being 117 hours, 117.2 hours in a month, right below the cap.
Right. And there was some reasons for that. We have a plan. This takes us into another area, sick. And I don't want to get too crazy on it, but we can keep sick. You call them hours. We call them sick trips, right? The history of our sick trips was the cap today is 1,600. So you can hold 1,600 hours of sick, 1,600 trips of sick. And at the time when we came up on the VSP, we've had this in our contract for numerous years, numerous contracts. And I can't tell you the exact year it came about, but I'll explain it. Because guys were retiring early. Some of them were military and they had TRICARE for life, but many didn't. So they went to the company and said, hey, we'd like to do something here so where we're forced to retire at age 60. We can't get on Medicare till 65. Is there anything we can trade? So they came up with a number. They said, well, you could trade 10 trips a month for you and your spouse, meaning not 10 for your spouse and 10 for you, but if you're married, it just costs you 10 trips a month. And we will pay your health care. And you could do that until the younger of the two of you reaches age 65, or you run out of sick trips. So we still have that in place, but you had to be 55 years or older for that to take place. And the reason they picked 55 was there's two healthcare plans. If you retired at age 55, all the way up to just before 60, you would get what we called Choice Plan C, I think it is. Not as good a healthcare plan, but a decent one. And then if you retired at age 60 or older, they would give you Benefits Plus. So same trips, no extra money or whatever. It's a much better healthcare plan. And I'm still toying with it, whether or not it can be done. But I think because you're retired, but you're using these sick trips, the question is, can I do an HSA, a higher deductible for these 10 trips, and then use some of my retirement money to pump into an HSA, right? Think about 5 years at a family of $9,000 a year. Well, that's another $45,000 to put into an HSA plan. But anyways, a whole different story. So the problem was with the VSP at the time, the company said, because there were some guys younger than 55 that wanted to go, but the company said, we're not going to let you use your sick trips to take you, all the way to age 65 unless you're 55 or older. So that kind of forced a lot of guys that were 54, 53, 52 that said, yeah, I'll do this. They said, oh, I'm going to have to buy healthcare because the company was only going to give them 1 year of healthcare in the VSP plan instead of being able to use their sick trips. So they were looking at it going like, hey, I'm 54, I'm 53, I get 1 year of healthcare and I got to buy 10 to 15 years of healthcare for me and my wife. That's a big nut. And they said, no, I'm not going to do it. So that's what forced that age right up to around 60 average age. I think that's me personally.
So you can bank up to 1,600 hours total. And how many hours of sick leave do you guys accrue a month?
We get what's called 10 to 1, and it's only on straight pay. So let's say you flew 100 hours 100 trips a month, and it was all straight. You would get 10 trips of sick for that month.
Okay, so only straight pay. Okay.
Right. But you can hold all the way up to 1,600. So that's how that works.
Can you sell it back when you retire?
No, and that's a current discussion that the company's looking at. We have so much of an issue with pilots now. A great article came out from SWAPA here recently regarding the definition of our sick. It's for sick and illness. It's not technically for personal time off. Yet we have, as you know, the FAA has come out with, and we subscribe to it, I'm safe, right? Which is the letters IMSAFE, right?
Right.
And it stands for illness, fatigue is in there, alcohol, all these different reasons why you would not want to fly, right?
Correct.
And so many pilots have justified, and rightfully so for them, I'm fatigued. And of course, a fatigue call does not hit your sick if it happens in the middle of the trip. But let's just say you came off a trip and you have to come off an AM into a PM, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you don't go to work till 9 o'clock at night. And you're like, I'm fatigued. There's no way I can do this safely. well, then you call in fatigued before the trip starts, but they'll hit your sick bank for it.
Okay, that makes sense. And what are your thoughts? Do you know how the Delta sick leave works?
Not exactly.
They get 270 hours every year on June 1st. I think it's 270. It's either 240 or 270. I think it's 270. The senior pilots are getting 270 hours June 1st every year. Use it or lose it. If you burn zero, from June 1st to May 31st, you get 270. It's erased and you start over 270 on June 1st. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's different. And I will tell you, because I kind of didn't finish what I was talking about there from SWAPA, where they're coming out. We're in negotiations, or there's some form of negotiations happening, not official, but more along a memorandum of understanding, or the company's interested. They're seeing the sick calls up tremendously from years past, and they want to try to solve it. And so there's been discussion of trying to do a sick leave buyback. We did have something that happened in our last contract that made it all the way to our Southwest Pilots Board of Directors, which is each crew base gets 2 representatives. So at the time, I think we may have had a dozen or 11, so we probably had 22 reps. What had happened was they were willing to give it a 1-for-1 payout in the new contract. Wow. Imagine a guy with, just take a number, 1,000 sick trips. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars at those pay rates that could have gone into a retiree healthcare plan, say, or some form of tax deferred used for health later. But the company wanted us to change from 1 to 10, right? Or 10 trips of work for 1 trip of sick to 12 trips of work for 1 trip of sick. And it passed the muster of the negotiating committee. Why? Because all of them had they had almost maximum amount of sick trips. And I will tell you, without disparaging my fellow pilots, that the vote was contentious to go that direction. And it was pretty much along what you would say in politics, party lines. Those who had lots of sick trips voted yes, and those that had fewer sick trips voted no.
Of course. Yeah.
So will we come to an agreement? I don't know. I hope we do. I think it's a good thing if we can solve this problem. It won't be good for the guys that like to pick up, I'll tell you that, because there's a lot of trips in open time because of sick calls.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense, especially as guys and girls are approaching the end of their career and they're carrying 1,000 hours of sick bank, that they need to start chipping away with that.
Right.
I do like Southwest policy of basically 10%. You're getting 10% of what you fly, you're getting in sick leave. It makes sense for the people who fly more should get more sick leave. And it's an equitable stake in your sick leave versus some of the other airlines and how their policy works. So I think between Southwest and Delta, there's pluses and minuses or both, but I think they're probably the 2 best passenger airlines with regards to sick leave policies.
Yeah, let me shed the historical light on that. So for many years, and I am one, I experienced a medical. I went out on a medical. It was decades ago, but it was different back then. And the sense was the loss of license and the disability didn't kick in until 6 months. So let's just say the average guy flew 100 trips a month. The number in everybody's mind was you needed to have 600 trips of sick. That would cover you to start the loss of license plan that we had. And then SWAPA, amongst ourselves, we started to create our own trust fund where we were putting a little bit of money, every one of us, in there for a guy who didn't have enough sick trips, right? So a junior guy who hasn't been here long enough to get 600 sick trips, we would cover him. Right? We would cut him a check every month to get him through his 6 months. So we created our trust. Then in the last contract, we created some new stuff where we changed the way all that works and the way it works for pilots today. This is kind of going into disability and loss of license, but it dovetails into the sick trips. And I'm going to explain why. I hope your listeners will be able to understand. So we changed it to you basically used to get 66% of what your line average was. Well, that went away. We went to 50%, and there was a cap on that. We eliminated the cap and said, we're going to go 50% of your line average. So let's say a guy averages 200 trips a month, right? He's going to get much more in loss of license. That's just the loss of license pay, right? And then there's a short-term disability, which pays basically up to, I'm going to say, 6 to 8 weeks. and then a long-term disability plan that you can purchase. Now, on the loss of license, the company gives us loss of license insurance, but it's taxable. Okay. So that means if you went out and let's just say we call it the MBE, the monthly base earnings. Let's say you were a low time flyer, 100 trips a month, you just did your line. You would get 50 trips and it would be taxed. Wow, you're not getting a lot. So maybe you want to take the additional long-term disability and the short-term disability, but now you got to pay for that out of your pocket today. No, I'm sorry. Did I say that? Yeah. So the taxation occurs if you go out on medical, but the company's giving you the insurance for free. Now you can elect to take that money tax free. Your loss of license can be tax free, but they impute your income. Imputing income means, hey, this is a value, and you're in a 28% tax bracket. You're going to pay this much for it because while you're working, if you go out, you'll get the money tax free. There's plus and minus to that. If you say, I like to use this example. Let's say you're a 30-year-old guy, pilot at Southwest, and you are chugging along doing your thing, and you have an epileptic seizure. You and I both know there's a strong likelihood you're never going to fly again. You're 30, and you've got 35 years you could have been doing this job. If you had taken the tax-free, which means you were just getting the imputed income, but you're getting more money out on the medical, they're going to give you the NEC, the non-elective contribution, not into your 401k, but to you tax-free. So you get the money, you just can't get it into a retirement plan. Whereas if you took the taxable, that NEC will still come to you, but it'll go into your 401k. So for a guy who has that happen to him, I think if I could make my numbers work to where I could pay my bills with the disability insurance if I went out on a medical and still get money into my 401k for 35 years, assuming the company lasts that long, right? That's enticing to me. So we have some guys that are high time flyers, and this is the height of the spectrum. They are taking it all. They're paying the imputed income. They're buying the short-term disability, right? If you had 2 to 6 months of living expenses, you wouldn't need to take short-term disability, right?
Right.
So why would you pay an insurance agent to go on a golfing outing in Hawaii when you could self-insure yourself there? And then the long-term disability, we have an A and a B, and they basically become more money. You pay more premium to get more money. Well, the same thing there, right? So we tell guys, if you could hold sick trips, you could be trading in those sick trips out on a medical to cover your insurance, right? What you'd need. Now, granted, in the case of a guy who's 30 years old, goes out the rest of his career, even if he had 1,600 trips, I don't know how he could get that at 30 years of age, he would run out of sick trips at some point. So it's not fully, but there's a way. There's guys out there that are saying in their 40s or 50s that they are paying as much because they're high time flyers. They are paying as much as $20,000 to $25,000 a year for insurance. And I tell them, I say, don't you want to think twice about investing $20,000 to $25,000 rather than buying insurance?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a lot of choice in that disability world, but it's not well understood by many guys. So there's a couple of pilots that wrote calculators. I think Swappa has one now. One of our pilots wrote, again, we have some talent among us. And he wrote a calculator where you could put a few numbers in there, and it tells you how much money you would have and how much sick trips you would need to cover 1 year of being out on the medical, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever. So a pilot can make a decision, I want to keep my sick trips and not pay for disability insurance.
So are you able to use your sick leave to bridge yourself to long-term disability?
Yes, you can do that too.
What is your premium for LTD, and what does it pay? Does it pay a percentage of what you've worked, or how's your LTD work?
So to answer your question on what disability insurance is costing us today, we have loss of license. If you were to go, the coverage is, I think there's additional coverage at 60 days, and it's per $100. It's $4.15 per $100. The short-term disability is 59 cents per $100, and that elimination period is 2 weeks, up to a max duration of 6.57 weeks. Our long-term disability A is good for 60 days, and it costs $1.25 per $100, up to a maximum limit of $25,000. And then the long-term disability B costs a little more. It's $1.59 per $100. The elimination period is 60 days, and it can go anywhere from $25,000 to $42,000 cap.
I'm sorry, what was it was a $1.59 per $100?
Yeah, so let's go through this again. Loss of license, $4.15 per $100. Short-term disability is 59 cents per $100. Long-term disability A is $125 per $100, and long-term disability B is $159 per $100 with two different caps in there: $25,000 cap and a $42,000 cap.
LTD A and B, is that taxable?
Good question. Is it taxable? I think it is. Yes.
Okay. Can you stack the LTD A and the LTD B?
No, you can stack the short term and either LTA. So here's what you can turn on and off. Your loss of license, you can turn to taxable or tax-free. Your short-term disability is either on or off, and your long-term disability is either off A or B.
So you're obviously extremely knowledgeable about all the benefits that you guys have contractually. What sort of infrastructure do you have to educate your pilots of all these benefits?
SWAPA is very good at it. We have a insurance disability committee. We have a retirement committee called the SWAPA 401k committee. They're extremely talented people. Many of these guys are very smart in their own sense, as well as the negotiating committee. We've had lawyers that are pilots on that. We've had certified financial planners that are on that, even FINRA, like, licensed in the insurance world. We have a gentleman that's in that. And then we've had others that have just worked, have, masters. I don't know if we've had several pilots with PhDs, but, they have a master's degree in these things, and they're good at what they do. And I like it because we're not hiring an outside professional who we're paying who doesn't really know what we do. Again, it's the same thing I said earlier in this conversation about, the best software developer is who is also the end user. But you also have to listen to your end users too to make changes. And that same concept here. The best negotiator is someone who's got experience in flying the airplane and insurance, or flying the airplane and retirement.
Yeah. Do they have seminars? Is it 1v1? Is it you have a phone call with someone, or
no? We have what they call the SWAPA minute, or the SWAPA number, I think we call it. And so it's usually a different number. So as an example, I don't know, we could use it 1600. So it may be SWAPA 1600, and that's the maximum sick trips. And then they'll go into all this stuff about sick trips, and they do like a little podcast. And it's a video podcast Sometimes it's audio, depending who they've pulled in to join them. And usually it's moderated by one of our communications pilots. We have some pilots that are on the communication committee, and we have some employees of SWAPA that do it. But a lot of the education comes from SWAPA. The association does more education than I think the company does. The only education the company does is on their 3 non-qual plans, because they own them, but they're limited. That education is limited.
Yeah, you definitely I have some sayings, and you want pilots hiring pilots, because we've got to sit next to the people for, hours at end in a very confined space. And just like education, because it is a different lingo, and unless you've walked a mile in the shoes, people really won't understand fully. Okay, that's great. I want to move on to premium flying. And I'll give you an example. My previous seat, I was 9% seniority wise. And my opportunities for premium flying, I think in a year, was about 6 premium trips in a year. It was a big airplane flying, so I wasn't scheduled to fly very often, but I did have a lot of time off. And premium flying at the company I work for, in comparison to at least Delta, I did a podcast with a Delta pilot, is scarce in comparison. Can you explain to me, just philosophically and culturally, how is premium time viewed at Southwest?
Well, you said something to me earlier. We define premium as time and a half. And then we have categories of what we call extra flying, right? Or open time flying. So the way it starts is, in the old Southwest way, was a trip would come in, whether it was covered because it got traded out and nobody wanted it, or somebody called in sick, right? So we have what's called the daily open time trips. They now are only about 2 days in advance. You can see those trips. And keep in mind, we're different at Southwest, right? Because we have one airplane type, everybody flies it, and we now have 13 crew bases. So we have If you're in base, you have priority over an out of base guy. But then we have, how are you bidding the trip? Are you bidding it straight or are you bidding it premium? If you bid it straight, you're probably going to get it, right? Meaning if you're in base, and then if nobody bids it in base, a guy out of base would get it. And it would go straight typically before it goes to reserve. And that happened that way up until this last contract. And what was happening was the company would then not be able to cover it with the reserve, and they would do what's called split the cover, which was good for the guys that wanted to pick up. Why? Because it had deadhead on the front or back or both. And as we said earlier in this conversation, deadhead is free money. You pay me the same, and the joke is we're dozing for dollars, right?
All right.
So anyway, back to my story here. So what they found out was we did an analysis, SWAPA did, and they said to the company, this is ridiculous. Why don't you just pay it time and a half rather than splitting it? You ended up paying more in the long run. So what they finally started to do was look at what the reserves on call for. We have what's called AM reserve and PM reserve, and I think we have a red eye reserve now too, because we just instituted not too long ago red eyes. And the reason we instituted red eyes at Southwest was we couldn't get our passengers from Hawaii in one day back to say Baltimore.
Yeah,
we just couldn't do it.
When you guys started flying Hawaii, that's the first thing I said, because I did a ton of those all night, those red eye flights from Hawaii back to California, landing at 4:30 in the morning.
Right. So our open time is sitting out there. Again, the guy tries to bid on it straight. He takes it. If not, it went to a reserve. Well, the change that happened was they said, okay, we'll agree. We'll agree to pay this premium, but only if it, as an example, an AM reserve comes on, let's just say 3 o'clock in the morning, and he has 2 hours to get to the airport. So if it checks in if he can be on call at 3, that means he could technically be there by 5. Anything that checked in before 5, guess what? We're going to go ahead and make that what we call premium before reserve, or POT, premium open time, time and a half. That means, hey guys, we're telling you this trip's going to go premium. You could bid on it premium. So guys are all bidding on it premium. Somebody out of base decides, hey, I'm hurting for money. I need this. He comes in last minute. We call it 59ing, because most of the sniping or 59'd it. They close on the top of the hour, and he'll come in and take it straight out of base. Well, guess what? He gets it. No harm, no foul. That's his choice. Some guys complain about it. Other guys say, hey, that's his prerogative. Go do it, whatever. So that's how that works. But then we instituted something else in this last contract, which is called VDT, Victor Delta Tango. That's voluntary double time. And so now what has happened, we've noticed the behavior of our pilots, right? So now they don't bid in the summertime is when the VDT typically comes out. They're smart and they're wise to the game. Pilots learn. They're better than Pavlov's dog, right? So what they'll do is they'll say, hey, look, I'm not bidding straight, and this thing is going to go premium. They only have 2 reserves left. So I'm not even going to bid premium. I'm going to let it go through the process, and then it's going to come out VDT. But here's where the company was smart. They said, we had instituted 2 contracts ago what was called SNOT, short notice open time. And it was either short notice open time straight or short notice open time premium. And what they did with that was they made it a 14-minute window, and it's going to be random. Well, the company wised up on this last contract too. They did the same thing with the VDT. So there's a risk. A guy's senior, he goes into a random generator with 8 other pilots. He may or may not get the VDT. He may or may not get the SNOT P. So there's some risk with that.
That's in your contract that the VDT is to be random?
Yes, the VDT is random, and is the SNOT. And what that does is it gives opportunity to the junior guys. Now, how do you audit that, though? How does the union audit that it's all random? Because after a while, you start going like, hey, why are all these senior guys not getting the trip? Well, because you could argue because the company doesn't want to pay more. So I'm told, I don't know because I'm not on that committee or involved in that there is a way to audit it, and they're watching it, right? Just to make sure that. But the whole intent is to get the junior force out there. And then, of course, the last thing we have with the open time, if none of that covers it, then it's called junior available, right? Junior assigned. That means you're going to get paid double time. But guess what? Scheduling's calling you as soon as you land. Don't go anywhere. We need you to do 2 more, or we need you to spend the night somewhere else.
Yeah.
But you're handsomely rewarded for it. Right. Now, for the guy that's on reserve or or coming off of a 4-day trip and just wants to go home to his family because he only has 3 days off, he doesn't like it. What they instituted for the reserve, if that happens, if he gets JA'd or what have you, he can turn around and say, hey, you JA'd me a day last week. I want you to remove a day of reserve next week.
Could he opt to have it paid as well?
No, he can only, so he gets the time off, right? Because he was guaranteed kind of time, but he got paid double time to do that extra day.
Oh, that was my next question. So a reserve that gets junior assigned does get paid double time.
As long as it's junior assigned. If it's part of his reserve block, he doesn't. But if he does get time and a half if they make him show up with inside the 2 window, they change his flight from what he was originally assigned. And oh, by the way, that's how things pay too at Southwest. Whatever you were awarded versus whatever you've done, you get the greater of the two.
Right.
So let's say I get it, and I'm sure that's the same with you all. Is that correct?
It's called something totally different, and it's a little bit convoluted, but that's the gist of it. Yes.
Yeah. So the beauty is, we like to say they put it on our board in red. Like, hey, revised assignment is red. The joke is, why are you making that red? They should make it green because here comes some money.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Right? I mean, because that's what everybody does. It goes, oh, we get rerouted. They're going to handsomely reward you for doing it.
So a common theme between Southwest and Delta is that there's more sharing of the premium time, where when you get, they call it green slips over at Delta, you get a green slip, a premium trip over at Delta, and very similar process. You go to the bottom of that list. It seems to be, and I don't know, I don't have the data, but it seems to me, based on the interviews that I've done and the conversations that I've had, that seems to be more lucrative for everyone than just certain airlines. It's strictly 100% seniority based, legality and seniority based.
Ours isn't. No, yeah. Southwest is. You have up to a point. Certain things. We talked about the 118% cap. We talked about in-base protection, but we also talked about the fact that someone junior you could come in and bid it at a lesser pay, right? So that benefits the company and that pilot who wants it.
So culturally at Southwest, can you expect to get a premium trip once a month, twice a month, on average, 3 times a month in the summertime?
Depends on your seniority, I would say.
Okay.
In the summertime, it's pretty fluid. There's a lot going on premium because remember, you had all those trips pulled for vacations. Guys don't want to fly, versus where guys do want to fly. Let's face it. In summertime, a lot of guys don't want to fly. They're just, hey, I'm going on a cruise. I'm going to hiking in Yellowstone, whatever they're going to do, right, for their vacation. Or they just want to be with family, right? So there's more trips available out there for pilots. But I will tell you this, from one end of the spectrum to the other, there are guys that just fly their line. They don't want to do anything extra. There's guys that may pick up a trip a month, and sometimes it's a premium trip. To the guys that are the extreme, that give away their whole line. They use whatever it takes, monthly overlap in the line construction. You don't have that problem with PBS, which we do. So that dumps trips at the beginning of the month because a guy had the previous month or whatever he was flying, right? And it overlaps 2 days. So the company's got to pull one or two of the other. And there's rules on that, but they pull it and it goes back into what you would call it the open time, but initially it goes back into the ELIT, which is, it used to be line improvement trip trade is what it was lit. And then it became enhanced line improvement trip trade. But it goes into a bucket where guys can literally trade, but they're trading it straight, right? They're like, hey, I need this day off. But the joke with ELIT is it's any holiday, any weekend you want. That's what gets in there, right? So then, but that's great, right? The weekend stuff is where the premium's going to be. So if guys are off, but the extreme guys are the guys who get rid of their entire line and all they do is fly premium. And some guys now even try to shoot. I'm not going out unless it's double time. Not me. I didn't say that. I'm saying that's what they say. And that's kind of what's out there.
Perfect segue. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Get rid of your entire line.
Well, we used to have in the old days, because we only had one airplane type and we were always expanding at Southwest Airlines, we had captains and first officers, but we had what was called lance captains.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yep.
Okay. So that means he was a first officer who was captain qualified, but he would bid a line as a first officer. So he would try to give away as much as he could to other first officers who wanted to pick up his stuff. And because he was very senior, he maybe had all turn lines, which is, let's face it, that's the creme de la creme for most pilots. Why? Because they're on the road so much, but they say, hey, honey, I know you want me to pay for this, or I want to do whatever, else. They will go out for a day turn because they can still come home and see their spouse, their children, go to a game, but they made a little extra money, right? And they sleep in their own bed. So the turns are lucrative, and that's what ended up happening. A lot of those first officers do that, give it away, and then that's where the giving away happened. Then you started to have the same concept happen as we eroded and got rid of. We no longer have the Lance Captain program because they say, well, we've got enough captains and first officers now. We can do this without, having to expand so quickly, because they wanted to have captains available if we were going to open up a new base or add more flights or whatever. And it usually would happen around the Christmas time. That's where those Lance captains were used a lot. But anyways, back to what you were saying about, I don't understand giving away. So guys will put up their whole line for giveaway, and someone might want it.
So they're just advertising. If they have 4 trips in a month, they just advertise and other pilots can just pick them up.
Right. And it used to be in the old days, we had a bulletin board in the pilot lounge, and guys would put up a trip trade giveaway form, and they'd put them all up there, and you would see all the FOs, and it did have a board for FOs, a board for captains. Now it's all digital, and it has been for years. And so you just put it up. And then beyond that, we even have guys who, it used to be done with the Lance Captain list. Guys would literally text or email or call their Lance Captain and say, hey, I got all these turns. If you want any of them, let me know. I'll hold them for you. And so in our digital system, we have giveaway, we have trade. So a giveaway is in black, blue is a trade, and then red is a giveaway with a code on it, like a personal pin. Oh. And that means it's probably been reserved for someone.
Okay.
So a guy doesn't go, hey, I'll take that turn, right? I want your turn. He goes, no. And they'll put a little note in there, say, for Fred or for John or for Susie or whoever it is, right? Yeah. So they'll know. But the whole goal is to give away their line, because why would they want to fly straight when they can fly premium? But there's a risk. The risk is if you don't have some cash in the bank, you might be at the end of the month, in the old days, standing there with your shorts around your ankles because you don't have enough to pay the bills.
Yeah.
But in today's world, because the sick thing that I talked about earlier has changed so much, even if you don't get the daily open time, which happens every day at 9 o'clock Central time is when all the bases close and they do their awarding. And it usually takes them 2 hours for the next day's trips. Then throughout the day, and it's usually on the odd hours of Central time with a few even hours. So at 1100, the big ones are 1300. 1700, but it's 11, 13, 15, 17, 19, every those hours, they come out with the hourly open time. And usually they dump the open time trips about 50 minutes prior, an hour and 10 minutes prior to it's going to close. Unless it's a short notice, which means, you probably got to be in that base or what have you. But if it's a short notice, you're only going to have 14 minutes to deal with it. And it's going to pop up. But we have a text alert system where guys could subscribe to all that, and they get these text alerts. We even have guys who have, on the text alert system, you can put a ringtone in. This is a funny thing. They have a ringtone that's money, 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 money.
Of course.
It's hilarious. And their kids will know. Their kids will know that they're like, hey, there goes dad or mom going to make money.
Oh, that's great.
That's some of the culture of Southwest, right? It's only at Southwest because, again, the Southwest pilot from day one was taxiing faster, was trying to get the shortcut, was doing whatever he could to get back on time. One, it was rewarding the passenger who wanted to get to his destination on time. 2, it was putting less time on the jet. And 3, he now had more time to pick up on his 100 hours a month. And he might pick it up with some deadhead on it, which means the goal was, 2 to 1 on the block time, 3 to 1. We've even seen as much as 6 to 1 on the block time, where a guy might be only flying 2 hours and they're paying him 12 trips for it.
Your system is inherently rewarding and efficient through and through.
Yes.
That's the conclusions I'm coming to with just in our short conversation today. Speaking of which, a mutual friend of ours that connected us, I got to share a story with you. There's certain trips at the company I work for that if it's on your schedule, you're stuck with it. There's no way out of it without calling in sick. You can't trade it. You can't drop it because the trip is just inherently inefficient or not desirable.
Hmm.
When I had this conversation with our mutual friend, his response was literally, there would be rioting at Southwest if that was the case.
I would agree. And we have one other out aside from just calling in sick on it. You wouldn't want to get caught. I don't think there's really any way to get caught, calling in sick because you're the only one that can answer the question. Am I safe? Am I safe? Right? Like
Right.
that acronym, right?
Right.
But there's another way. Let's just say, and I'm sure your airline has it too, but culturally we've had it for the decades I've been here and before. Let's just say something happened at home, right? And you don't want to call in sick. You don't want to screw the company or you don't need the money or whatever your philosophy is as an individual, right? And every pilot's different. So I don't condemn one or the other. But something happens at home or a family member got ill, you call the chief pilot and they'll say, "Hey, I'll pull that no pay." Now they're going to put leave no pay, which means you can't turn around and go pick something up double time because you asked for it off, right? But it's the gentleman's way of doing business, right? Or should I say the professional's way, because we have women among us here, it's the professional way of doing business, right? I mean, like, I can't do that, but I'll go make it up later to the company. I'll pick up some open time, I'll do it straight, whatever. And that's a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah, I don't think I haven't seen and I was in a union position for several years. I've not seen really anyone abuse, in my opinion, any sort of leave or sick leave. And still true to this day, I think those days might be behind us. And the company's usually really good about giving people time off for whatever reason.
Good.
Yeah, I don't see that as being an issue. I think that's a previous generation that most of those guys and girls are gone.
Yeah, and one last thing, I think the SWAP, a recent article that we talked about here on sick leave buyback that came out, they said, what will be the spirit, what will be the inspiration behind a change where you have a buyback program that worsens it to where you get less for what you're getting today, and it's it's the old fear thing, right? Like, are you going to have more pilots coming into the flight deck? You're healthy, and he's coming in there just hacking away. And you're sitting 3 feet from the guy. And as we all know, there's no way not to be exposed to it. You can do all the sandy wipes you want and all that stuff. You're still breathing air that he's breathing.
Right. So let's just talk about, we'll kind of start wrapping this up, but culturally at Southwest, you guys went through some big airline changes. You guys are now a big airline. And how has the airline changed from what you've seen culturally with regards to, mergers, post-COVID world, et cetera?
Well, I think I've been through 2 mergers, right? Morris Air and AirTran. And I think Southwest took pride in itself in hiring. Now we had Spirit just go under. We're hiring a lot of the Spirit pilots. But instead of with a merger where you get everyone comes over collectively, those people, and this is no offense to them, there's many great people in the Morris group and in the AirTran group. But when they come over collectively, they're more willing to say, just like you would have at United with Continental, well, back at AirTran or back at Continental, we did it this way, right? So that creates like a rub, I guess is the word I'm looking for, right? People, the hair in their back goes up a little bit, like, hey, this is Southwest, or this is whatever airline you're talking about, Delta or United or American. And so I think you have some challenges that come there. But when the individual comes over on his own accord, he's less likely to say that. He's more likely to adopt the Southwest way. So culturally, that becomes an issue, in the flight deck. The other thing you have is, and I don't want to begrudge my AirTran colleagues because there are many good ones, but it was just their standard to run down their sick. And it wasn't the Southwest way. And now we're seeing more and more pilots running down their sick because they're like, hey, it's my benefit. They had a different attitude about it. And so that's what I think prompted Southwest management, and the union to start sitting down and say, how do we curb this? Because the reports we read and heard was that some weekends we had more than 25% of the pilots calling in sick. Really?
Wow. Interesting.
So how do you fix that problem, right? How do you, as a business owner, how do you fix that problem, right? Because it's a problem.
I don't think you can. You attrit it is what you do. And the airline I was at before the merger, I was there for 5 years, and the surviving entity, I've been there for 16. And just recently, and I'm on an airplane that was at one of the legacies, And I was flying with someone who was from a different legacy, and they're saying, it may have been training event, it was a training event actually. And they're saying things that, hey, the way brand X airline flew this airplane was this way because of this. And I don't say anything, but it's inherently wrong. It was just different. The process was completely different. The software was completely different. And there's still people that have their heels dug in on their previous airline. And the airline I was a part of for 5 years, we did some things that were better and more efficient. But at the end of the day, the merger was far more successful than anyone who went through this merger at this airline ever could have dreamed of. There are some days I'm just shocked at how successful it's been, especially, with the quarterly reports that just came out with the cost of fuel being the cost of fuel. And hopefully, when's the next Black Swan event? Who knows? Hopefully those days are behind us for permanently. It seems like the people that are running the airlines now are doing it the right way versus previously.
Well, to piggyback on, let me just finish on your culture question. So, Southwest, I think anybody who's worked around or jump seated on Southwest would know that we would go out of our way to help our brethren, right? Our get a guy on the jump seat, get him to work. How can we help? What can we do? You've probably seen before Southwest pilots pushing wheelchairs. We always wanted to stay on time. That was from my generation. That's what we did. And I remember a few years ago where we showed up and we were running late and we took the airplane and the flight attendant crew change. And I said, hey, the first officer is going to be doing his stuff. I got mine done. I'm going to go push some wheelchairs. I just want to give you a quick brief. And the flight attendant says to me, well, it came in late. Why does it have to go out on time?
All right.
And that attitude has become more pervasive, which is anti the culture of Southwest. Southwest always, in my day, the delayed flight was the focus. Today, it's the stepchild.
Is that because of operationally, it's just that much more efficient?
No, it's we were more efficient. We were able to turn it quicker. Why? Because we didn't have to scan every bag. We counted it. We didn't have to worry about someone finding their seat. They just came in and sat down. And also culturally, what's changed for Southwest is, and this is out of the pilot's control, but we became less focused on the business customer and more focused on the leisure customer. And we all know that a business customer comes in and sits down, pretty much does this enough that they feel comfortable doing it. Whereas a leisure traveler, it's the first time, right? They're going to look around. Oh, how do I do this? It's slower.
They've never been on an airplane before, right?
Yeah, and as someone who jump seats on American, United, Delta, and many of the other airlines frequently, I've seen that your ground times are much longer than ours. As an example, we have 170 some seats on a 737-800 or a MAX, right? And fewer on we've changed the actual capacity now, but it used to be 143 and a 175, right? But so we come in with a full 800, let's just say, or MAX, and management scheduled a 40-minute turn, and it's a flight number change with 2 crew changes. And let's just make it even worse. Let's put it in Florida where there's 15 wheelchairs. That's not going to happen.
And 85 thunderstorms.
Yeah, right. But even on a good day, right? No wheelchairs and 175 on, 175 off, right? And changing the pilots out. You have got to hustle. So you have to be preemptive and proactive to look at the plane for the day and say, you know what, if we could leave 10 minutes early here, which is, you have contract of carriage, you can't leave more than 10 minutes early because you have told the public this flight's leaving at such a time. And there's an acceptable legal standard there of 10 minutes early. So you push 10 minutes early, you go flash, you're looking for the thing because you want as much time when you get there. And then as a captain, you have to be, like I said this for years, you are the maestro of the orchestra.
Right.
You got to make sure all the parts play. Or you're the quarterback of the team and you're going to call an audible.
Yeah.
You're calling the audible to the ops agent. We're going to go 10 early, please. I'm going to help wherever I can. I'm going to go down the ramp. I'm going to tell the ramp we want to go 10 early. We'll call the dispatcher. That's what you're doing on your 40-minute turn. And we don't have meals at Southwest. So you also may be the guy who's saying, look, and this is old days and some still today, I'm going to run off and get food. What do you all want? This is what a captain does at Southwest Airlines these days.
Do you guys still operate essentially that way today?
Somewhat, yes. The old guys like me and others do that, and we try to instill that in the new group, but there's still a fight to it doesn't matter. We get there when we get there. Well, that's not what they paid a ticket for. They paid a ticket to leave at a certain time. I will tell you, I was a little upset the other day. I had finished a trip in Pittsburgh, and I had a meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was going to jump on a flight from Pittsburgh to somewhere. And I get to the airport. I was like min sleep, right? I mean, I'm not operating, so there's not a rest issue for me. I just release and I'm going to go. But I'm going to catch a ride on American. And I listed, I put my email in and everything, right? My phone. And I get to the airport and I look for that flight, and there's one at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's no other flight. And I'm going, where's my 7:40 something in the morning flight? So I get on one of the scoreboards or something else, on my phone, and I find out that flight is running 15 hours late. And I'm thinking to myself, I sure hope American Airlines alerted their passengers, because they didn't alert me, and I signed up.
Yeah.
That's disgusting service, right? I mean, don't we have a duty and an obligation to, try to serve the public?
I'll give you a tiny example, and it's, the operations are completely different. But if there's a 5-minute, they got their bin turn times, and if there's a 5-minute slip on the departure time and everything is done, it feels like, and I don't know if this is true, but it certainly feels like they post it on the screen right in front of the jet at the gate, right?
Yes.
And it feels like at times, certain bases throughout the system, they're going to delay until that exact time, even if everything is done. That is a huge, cultural difference between Southwest and arguably the rest of the industry.
Well, many of us, I know there's some among us, I don't know if it's many of us, but we have said this ever since we went to these scoreboards like you all have and stuff. They'll publish, okay, it's 2 minutes late, right? So now it goes from green to amber, right? Or whatever. And it's shows late. And they text all the passengers at Southwest, it's late. I don't like that. And here's why I don't like that. In our day, the Department of Transportation didn't look at departure times. They looked at arrival times. And if you were within 14 minutes of scheduled arrival time, you were considered on time. I don't know why they can't apply the same standard to these scoreboards. And here's why. Let's say you're 12 minutes late, like you said, or 5 minutes late, right? Now you're showing it late. You have all these customers that are waiting to board. And what do they see on their phone or the thing? Oh, it's running late. Well, let's go to the bar. We can have one more drink.
Exactly.
So now you make me even later. I'm trying to help out the entire, not just the customers, but the controllers, because the controllers don't want a system where they got a bottleneck. All these flights are late, and now they got a bottleneck, right? And so then they make it even worse. So I think it's important. I had this discussion with a controller 20 some years ago when they used to be able to sit on their jump seat. And they said, if we knew you were late, we'd help you out.
Yeah.
Right? We'd help you out because they want their piece of the puzzle. They have their own scope and puzzle, and they want you back on time because the system works best when it's on time.
In the Air Force, we had a term, we called it pushing the wet noodle. Once that delay gets pushed out on the app and everyone gets their text messages that it's delayed, you're absolutely right. We can get one more drink. We can stand in line for a hot dog or, one more trip to the bathroom, fill in the blank. And
right.
So the whole thing comes to a standstill very quickly.
Right. But if we can program, pilots program, we have IT departments program, can't they put code in place, right, that says if it's 14 or less, we're going to show it on time. Now all the customers show up on time. They're ready to go, but we might be a few minutes late, but we don't keep snowballing the effect of delay.
That's probably the next big investment for the airlines as to how they mitigate that.
Right. But and if this podcast reaches someone that's in management at all the airlines, to me, that's the best thing they could do because there's no violation of, you're not lying to the public. You're just saying we plan on making this time up. And we've used 14 minutes as the Department of Transportation's ruling of what an on-time arrival is.
I'm not sure if there's, I worked ramp while I was in college. It was non-union. That was in Phoenix. But I'm not sure if it affects collective bargaining agreements, that they have to have minimum number of minutes to turn an airplane based on the size and
right.
et cetera. But I'm sure that's a rabbit hole, and I'm sure it's probably been addressed. But you're absolutely right. That definitely is a limitation within the operation, is putting, hey, we're 10 minutes late and everything. It's pushing a wet noodle. Okay.
Right. And you as a pilot and I as a pilot, the last thing we want to do is be staring a 12 to 15 hour duty day in our face, right?
Yeah.
That's the last thing we want to do.
And
particularly if it doesn't eliminate us from getting out of it, we got to do it. Now we set ourselves up for fatigue and other issues.
Right. And at most airlines, not being compensated while you're sitting there.
Correct for you guys. Yeah.
Hey, let's wrap this up. I'm just going to firewall some questions for you. Some of them are pretty obvious, but
okay.
What would you rather have, higher pay or better work rules?
I think the work rules made a hill. I lived under. We had better work rules when I first started at Southwest. I mean, we had, and we had a positive attitude. So I think that I'm not saying don't earn your right pay and stuff, but I think the work rules trump the pay within reason because your life is better.
Absolutely. What's the most underrated provision in the Southwest contract?
Wow. Probably our W-2s. We won't go there. That's
a perfect answer. That's the whole motivation of this entire podcast. What's the biggest quality of life advantage at Southwest?
Oh, definitely. It is our line bidding. We don't have PBS.
What's the biggest weakness in the Southwest contract?
Scope has been pretty tightened up, but I think at some point, if we were to go international, we want to make sure we protect that the money is, we own the equipment. So maybe scope, that's, and young guys won't understand that, but you guys at other airlines do. You don't want to have flights taken away from you because that leads to concessions and furloughs.
Absolutely. Cabotage
it is.
What do you know about the United Airlines contract that you'd like to have in the Southwest contract?
I think the only thing I would take out of your contract is the retiree healthcare plan, where you can get that somehow get money into a tax deferred plan that could be used for illness and medical costs later. But you're not penalized because it was tax deferred to you. We tried to get that plan and it never went anywhere. COVID got in the way.
Yeah, I have a lot of complaints about that plan, and it's it should be voluntary.
Right, it should be voluntary.
The guy who pushed for that plan, I worked with him when I was on the military affairs committee, and the guy who pushed for it said, pilots don't know how to plan for their retirement. And my question was, according to who? Oh, do you have the data? I mean, that might be true. I'm not disagreeing with you, but where's your data on that? And the fact that you're handcuffed, I'm retired military. I'd rather take that money and invest it into a top hat program or something. I'd rather put it elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's the beauty. We have choice on those plans, right? And you can opt into that plan, all three of those plans, and you can turn them off the next year if you want.
Yeah.
Just because you started, it doesn't mean you have to keep doing it every year and you have to stuck with this. I mean, we have a bigger problem at Southwest, and it's a first world problem. We have guys over 7 figures in those plans. And when you get into 7 figures with those plans, when they give you the money, if it's over 7 figures in a year, they will withhold 39% versus 24%. That's part of, I don't know if it's IRS code or if it's part of the trust thing. But so think about it. If you go $1 more from 6 figures to 7 figures, they're going to take $150,000 more.
Yeah, that is the first world problem, but hopefully that's why you have a financial planner to advise you with those in retirement. Okay, so we started off and you said you had one of 2 choices, UPS or Southwest. Well, knowing what you know now, would you rather have flown for Southwest or UPS?
Oh, definitely Southwest. This company is an awesome company. We've gone through some rough times recently, but let me tell you, I think I made the best decision I could have made with the information I had at the time. And UPS is a good company. They've had some challenges too, but I think by far Southwest.
When I started putting this episode together, I thought it was going to be just about retirement accounts. Instead, I realized retirement is really just the final score. The things that determine that score happen every single day over a 30-year career. They're found in the work rules, scheduling flexibility, retirement contributions, how you're paid, premium flying vacation, and all the small details hidden inside a contract. That's why this series exists, because airline contracts aren't just legal documents, they're career blueprints. Some numbers that were passed to me by our guests that were not incorporated in the podcast. 17,000 pilots total ever hired at Southwest. There's 12,000 active today. Of the 17,000, 470 have deceased. Of the 17,000, 1,100 left the airline for other ventures. Of the 15,900 who stayed, 3,400 retired from the airline. Of those 3,400, 450 retired early, and another 634 took the VSP during COVID. So today they have 12,000 active pilots, 2,300 living retired. Of these 14,300, 512 Southwest pilots had over 3 million. 30 had more than 5 million, and 4 had more than 10 million. Now, I don't know those numbers as they compare across the board because some of the airlines don't publish these numbers, but it's just something to think about as you look collectively how you're accrediting pay towards your retirement and how the companies are giving you benefits to save money that is tax deferred.
If today's episode resonated, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, subscribe, and stay locked in. If you've got questions, a story to tell, or you're ready to elevate, send a direct message. This is where warriors evolve, one conversation at a time.